I'm very happy and very pleased to introduce Catinca Malaimare, who's joining us from Romania for today's session. And as you've seen from the poster, from the advert, Catinca is a postgraduate student in her second final year due to COVID from the Royal Academy of Arts. So making the best out of the bad lot of pandemic, making lots of lovely work, which we're looking forward to hearing about now. So Catinca, I will hand over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Laura, for the invitation. It's I'm really happy to be here and to show you some work and share some of my research. So let's get right into it. So I titled this work. I've been thinking quite a lot of how to introduce the sort of research that goes behind the work and behind sort of my performances and live installations. And I've been looking a lot at old adverts, like newspaper adverts from the 70s and the 80s, when there was like a big shift in design for technologies and especially kind of domestic commodities. So I was thinking a lot about why am I attracted to the aesthetic kind of value of an object, and I kind of compose my work around this attraction between myself and another body, which is essentially like a dance partner. So one of the adverts that I was looking at was for a new TV set, and at the end of it, it said, "Isn't technology beautiful? Full stop." Almost like a very narcissistic, very self kind of praise almost sentiment that they were playing with, and I thought it sort of captured what I was thinking about as well. These are prototypes. They are presented as like beautiful models, as like a consumption kind of image, and also it made me think that these are images that are waiting to be used in some way. So yeah, to kind of begin this aesthetic kind of value of technology and the sort of careful choice of words that kind of surrounds their introduction into the world and sort of the ideologies of digital and machine manufacturing is something that I am really attracted to, and kind of gives shape to this conversation here. And I think with this image, the first image I selected, it's actually from a new project that I'll open here in Bucharest next week. So I won't share too much about it, but I just wanted to include it because it's the most recent work. It's the work that I'm sort of closest to in both kind of thought, feeling, but also kind of the ideas behind my research as it occurred to me. So the work here, sort of this image here, the sort of portrait, is from kind of a larger work that I'm developing right now, where I think a lot about kind of anthropomorphic technology, so things that they have a body that resemble the human body, or a sort of animal, or in this case like an insect, or a tarantula, something that is kind of connected to the human body but actually has so many, has 8 legs. It's more than a human body, becomes a measure to my own body. So this attraction to technologies that assume referent in the real world is something that I'm really attracted to. This idea of the anthropomorphic technology that is a queer body, that it's mass manufactured, but on a small scale mass manufactured. It's 3D printed at times. So I think it made me think that we can't ignore the sort of material basis of production, and especially with my work, I'm interested a lot in that, in the actual kind of physical material that I play with. Their skin touches, the artificial surface there's something that I learned, on a residency in Japan, that I was working a lot with manufacturing companies and prototype developers, and one of the things that they told me, and it stuck with me, that in some production houses in Japan, the manufacturing techniques were mostly for domestic equipment, manufactured with touch in mind. So with the idea that, we have different levels of touch and kind of haptic ways of understanding and handling an object. So the idea is that for export, the same technology is built with more durable materials, harder kind of aluminum, harder kind of more durable materials than they do for local kind of production, which made me think a lot about the fact that, we are quite aggressive with our technologies. We're more likely to throw a DVD player or a smartphone and not care, about the dents that kind of happen as a result of this. But there, it was a culture of the object that I felt really attracted to, because of the manufacturing, that there was actually an idea that touch is somewhere in the assembly line, and I really like that. So what I'm going to show here is like a mixed chronology that entertains this internal logic for me, that feeds into the work, a feedback loop that kind of seems symptomatic to how we react to our reflection, that, we either fall for the narcissism of the gesture, or we fear the demonic reflection that might take over as our new self in the mirror. So some of these works were shown in premiums last year at the Royal Academy, and been thinking a lot at that time about guardianship, and the fact that we find guardians in more than just spirit when we think about technology, and the fact that, these guardians for technology, they could be either statues on a pedestal, or, just kind of elevated bodies, this idea of a body that's kind of a bit higher than you, has this sort of petrified quality, like a vestige, that I was really interested in. And this idea that, flickering screens are kind of sentinel with guards, kind of paired with the idea that advertisements can appear totemic in the night, ablaze with human features. This idea that, we are not warned by this. So the idea between this work is that it's a diptych, and they're both kind of imagined as guardians that, they stop looking alike until coming a full circle and becoming identical again. So, complete fabrication, that we kind of lost the roots of it in the web of our dreams. And this is where the sort of research starts, where I find these advertisements from the 70s or the 80s that I find really fascinating. And this one especially, because of the title of it, Still Watching Dirty Movies. These sort of like innuendo and the language that I was saying, earlier, that it's important to me how technology and a prototype kind of is presented. So these advertisements are full of a very performative discourse, I think. So, Still Watching Dirty Movies, there are alternative views you could try. They'll never show any trace of blur or shake. So this idea that you're looking through a surface that's dirty, that's not optimal, optimized for human eyes. And the sort of end kind of line, isn't it time you came clean? You're expected to wipe away your smudged fingerprints from your TV screen. Anything else coming in between leads to you straining your eyes to make up a clear image, and as a result, it will make you blind. So these kind of headlines have the same intonation as threats, essentially. you know, kind of nodding perhaps to a secret identity behind these objects, you know, the sort of mastermind figure that's locked up in a control room. And the same with this, you know, this idea of the mini miracle, these very grand statements that they make, and the fact that, you know, find a TV that's happy to watch itself, you know, it's happy to be its own company. I find that really, really fascinating. And especially this one from Philips that I was really attracted to, because this is a TV that I've worked with, and it's a TV from the 80s, and it's from that space age design era. You know, the Sonio ideologies of design kind of intertwine with eyes that are no longer seeing. You know, they're capable of devouring something. They're capable of devouring you. And I think that choice of words kind of automatically speaks to a desirable face value of technology. And so these kind of works I've started making in September last year, when I started as an artist in residence at Raven Row with a collective of technical specialists called Agorama, where we began working together on 2 projects. You know, one was the digital fabrication, thinking about the economy of matter and pertain to technology, manufacturing and manufacturer. And while we were engaging in this conversation about manufacturing and personalizing technologies that were essentially going to be handled by a human body, I bought in these 2 TVs that belonged to a certain era where, you know, there seemed to be a lot of promise and fantasy that is evident also from the advertisements that, you know, that surrounded and that I showed you earlier. And what interested me about these is that they're very sculptural. They're, like the advertisement said, they're beautiful even when they're off. But what I sort of starting working with them and spending time with them and creating these images, it sort of came to me that I'm actually attracted to a sort of project, prospect of aging in technology, and, you know, this idea of the relics of technological production, the kind of attribute that, you know, anthropomorphic technologies have, and is deeply rooted in a form of science fiction that sort of based on poetry of possibility and promise, so sort of kind of fantasy and desire. So I'm interested often in something that resembles the relic than the most current technology. And a possible reason for that maybe is that visually technology has gone more chameleonic, you know, more invisible, more micro, more underneath our skin. So it kind of lives beneath our skin and triggers a lot of kind of love, hate, fear sensations from underneath our skin. You know, it lives on our eyeballs. And with that idea is that, you know, vision becomes scanning, recognizing faces, you know, reading their attributes, and we internalize into our existence the technologies that surround us, you know, stripping bare the bodies of those we encounter. And then thinking a lot about vision that becomes haptic, that, you know, its body size has been reduced to an internalized experience of it, which leads to a conclusion that, you know, if there's a visual pollution factor to our own agencies, which I find really interesting. And our tendency is to create and design more economically, to reduce, you know, to go to the essence, only kind of materials, the body parts, the connections between parts that before were very diagrammatic have become more design ideologies than simply functionality in these objects. And the beauty of something old and the sort of aesthetic seduction of the old that crosses over to become a ghost is something I'm really interested in with these prints, because I've realized that time has to pass to suggest, you know, a ghostly autonomy or potential, a sort of semblance of a human aging process, or, I don't know, maturing. If you can say, yeah, the TV TV is maturing. And I think visual relations and the response there, that, you know, where image precedes choreography, the sort of like haptically visual elements of that relationship. And technologies are utilitarian, but they also have an identity. You know, they're basic commodities now, but there's utility and identity in these objects. So I think what I'm really attracted to is not so much a digital world, or I'm not attracted to the most updated technology, but I try to work very visually, and I respond visually to an object. So in a way, I try to create like a visual manual, you know, constructed as if there's not much reference point to existing technologies. Like I like to consider them as dance partners. I like to create a choreography that completely denies the fact that these have been used before. So kind of create a very clean slate for them. And kind of technology is a vessel, and the visual is a vehicle making some sense of it and our shared experience. And I think shared here is not to be misunderstood for an equal footing or an equal relationship, because we can be vulnerable, but we have some crude and cruel intentions. You know, we're ready to take our digitally feathered chickens to the slaughterhouse without any remorse. So this work is called Low Sodium, and that's one sort of element or symbol that I've been working with for a long time. It's this sort of street illumination light, this sort of yellow that's a bit toxic, but it's attractive or repulsive at the same time. And with this work, it was made during the pandemic when I had a studio in Bethnal Green in a former textile factory. And it's kind of interested in this architecture of performance that's highly reliant on space that we can project onto, and especially project on these choreographies that interest me, you know, when I bring in technological elements alongside my own body. So the title Low Sodium is in reference to the light property of the filter that I'm using in the photographs. You know, the sort of danger zone paint signaling and marking is used a lot in kind of electric boxes. So they both the performer and the lights here, they both absorb light and the dark of the room and merge with the architecture of the surrounding kind of metal elevator frame. And what interests me about this is that the anatomy of the object is very beautiful, and it's very front-facing. The sort of the mechanics around it is something that I take into consideration when I start performing with them. And with this work, is something that sort of obsessed me quite a lot, is that, you know, we should reconsider the screens that surround us, the laptops and the smartphones and the TVs, you know, those the watches that count calories, and the integration, you know, that kind of adorn our washing machine. And to see them for a second as appendages and facial features chopped up and bandaged back together, you know, designed to convenience our lives. So this idea that, like, the stone lions, you know, this magnificent kind of edifice is poised at the foot of a temple, you know, barking push notifications at us. And I'm interested in a play of words that brings out a very performative meaning behind that. So this idea that, you know, there's a cloak covered in eyes, which could be a medieval equivalent of a smartphone infused with an Internet of Things, or some technologies have been written in existence long before they were produced, you know, long before manufacturing and mass production. And that's why it's very fitting that their qualities have been reflective and into supernatural, I think. And you know, and the impact on the human and the non-human. And with this work, it's sort of it kind of confronts you with this reality that, you know, machines are dance partners to us. They're closer than we're ready to admit to anyone. You know, the sort of performer here is flanked by stage lights. You know, the barn doors are open. You know, there's like, she performs this clambering kind of embrace onto these lights, like lifting herself on their frames, where bodies kind of parallel and mimic one another. You know, these design ideologies that slowly kind of become entwined into the visual aspects of the work. And I'm kind of interested in working with technologies of representation and the photographic tools, the kind of temporality that makes a comeback through a pastime, this antiquity or the original fire that the neon light stands for. It becomes kind of an accompaniment to the body. And I work a lot also with this idea of the chameleon and the fact that, you know, eyes have a very deceiving quality. But like I said earlier, I'm thinking a lot about eyes that not only watch but are sort of devouring you. You know, they take a lot, which is something that I was thinking a lot in Japan about, this sort of state of being blindfolded in a very contemporary society, where you know, we are not allowed to be blind anymore. We're not allowed to exist in darkness. You have to constantly be seeing and kind of treat our eyes as if they have no eyelids, essentially, which kind of feeds really well into this work, which is called Two Screens Left Turned On at Night. So the sort of play that, you know, you're kind of teasing your technology quite a lot. So like what I said earlier, that we are quite cruel with how we handle them. We're not just cruel with physically abusing our technologies, but we were also able to tease them verbally. And with this work, I was interested in the panopticon kind of idea of a contemporary society that we are actually actively participating in watching and being watched. And that the title, the sort of the idea of mirror that might better reflect technologies of representation than you know, the tools of photography, or the sort of tools that belong to the camera, which has become quite liquid in how we think about, you know, taking a photo of ourselves, like we are in front of the camera and behind the camera at the same time, having this dual relationship with our own body, consuming it and also sort of wanting to pose. And that idea that whatever image it would produce, it would be a reflection, not an image, you know, fed through a USB. This idea that if we're blindfolded, we have an input into that blindfold. So it's not that you're blindfolded that you're blind. It's you're ever seeing, actually. And I think with this performance, symmetry is something that is very important to me. That I create a scene or an installation based on symmetry, and this kind of interest around the performer and bringing and drawing the focus to it, which again speaks a little bit to that idea of the guardianship. This idea that, you know, we are flanked by technology. I like to play a lot with this idea that the prototype is center stage. And then on the wall, there's these sort of signs that they say full or empty, and they're on opposite sides of the performer. So in a way, the performer in the work kind of migrates to one side or the other. And these kind of speak a lot to what I was saying earlier, that, you know, the photography is quite a liquid process right now, because, you know, you're in front and behind the camera. I like the idea that my performers try to reach a sort of camp pose, they really think about how they want to look and how they want to be consumed, but they make that eye contact with the viewer, which I think is quite important for me. You know, how the viewer reacts and the access that I give to the viewer, whether it's like an intimate space that they only get a glimpse of, or something that they have access to at all times, and I just become this this other object in the work. Is something I'm really interested in. And with these lights, you know, they become a measure to my own body. They're the same height as me. They really speak of that kind of attractive quality that technology has. They're not repulsive. They're attractive, actually. With this work, it's quite a triumphant moment because performances were allowed to happen again at some point last year, and you know, where distance between us was greater, but without being metaphorical. So I was performing these on top of a van, almost like I was surveying my audience from above, and there was a lot of kind of chance moments, like here, where I also have a lighter in my hand, so it felt like the most natural fire there wasn't from the LED. And kind of disinfection was an idea that started with a profound research into how sodium-based light manifests, and the end-of-life habits of light, and cuckooing around itself, making itself invisible to us, keeping itself to itself. This return to the private was substantial, and was enough explanation for me to consider the desire to consume your own body, like others kind of consumed you. This cradling yourself, getting that very real sense of your own mass. And I think disinfection here wasn't in relation to the context of a pandemic, but a clinical process that has entered the lingo of wellness centers and well-being. You know, these cures of new technologies, taking kind of a little bit of the natural resource and turn the customers into greedy consumers of it, to keep the demand for it, to shift and shape light. You know, the nail salons disinfecting Caesars under red light, and that was something that I came to as a result of being in a wellness center for a treatment, and I found there that there was this artificial sun that they had there, that it was constructed. It's a technology from Germany, and it's prototyped in several kind of wellness centers. And it's shaped like a sphere. So this idea of mimicry with technology and finding that that link to our real world is something that I find interesting. And the fact, the entire idea that it's, you know, it's an artificial sun, again, like naming technology is something that I find quite interesting when it comes to these performances that I think about. And again, it kind of links to those advertisements where one TV, you know, I actually had this TV that kind of a reclining TV, you could adjust its angle, and the headline for that was that, you know, it bends over backwards for you. This idea that it's there for you, and its body, it's there for you, and it could be read in a way that was quite open to interpretation, and my interpretation to it is very visual. So I think, yeah, that the sort of choreographic language comes from responding physically to something, like handling, like putting my body next to it, you know, thinking about screens as mirrors. And, you know, the fact that they would probably be happier if they were mirrors in our bedrooms rather than, you know, TVs hanging in a room, because they would be able to partake in this sort of narcissistic relationship with yourself, that, you know, you're consuming your own image through them. So they would better help you if they were mirrors in some way. I I think that is kind of essential to my way of thinking, and the fact that these are anthropomorphic technologies takes me back to this idea that they sort of elicit pleasure, and we sort of consume them visually, so they trigger all these kind of sensuous kind of experiences that we have with them, and and that element of pleasure is something that interests me with this idea that is technology beautiful. And for me, it's become a very kind of obsessive thought that I recite to myself continuously, and it has become sort of personal mantra that I often kind of think about. That it kind of makes me want to kind of put them on my body as well. So they're also objects that I kind of adorn my body with. They become either like a very beautiful kind of jewelry, or something at a larger scale, like an armor. I think that's also something that I'm really kind of interested in when I choose a technology that I want to work with. And with this project that I'm opening next week, that sort of light that's shaped like a tarantula, it was funny because it started as this quite aggressive imagery of a spider, consuming your body, but actually maneuvering it and dancing with it or rolling on the floor with it changed its appearance. It became like a wilted flower, or like a wilted daisy. It became completely organic from this quite stiff body that I I had to begin with. And what interested me in it was that when you stomp on a spider, their legs sort of like retract, and this light had the sort of the way it was constructed, a hinge mechanism, everything mimicked that sort of dying process of the body, sort of the all 8 legs sort of coming together. So that really attracted me to this, because it had a very real image in my head, and I think if I work kind of on image-based work, which is also why I'm not showing any video here, because I'm interested a lot in the stillness of an image and capturing that that moment that's sort of in between this totemic advertisement or a fashion shoot, or a very private moment that you happen to sort of stumble upon, and then you take this photograph, but then the performer kind of continues, disregards you as a viewer completely. So I think that's the sort of relationship that attracts me to asking myself these questions, the kind of aesthetic value of technology, and take it from there, consider them as ghosts or relics. I think that's kind of essentially how I make my performances.
So yeah, thank you so much for that talk. It was so interesting. Yeah, and I can't wait to ask you some questions. So yeah, in preparing for this Q&A, I was doing a lot of research into your work, and I think it's incredibly strong and powerful. I love your video work and the still work, and then your written work as well. It's so strong. And I really like the way you sort of explore that kind of comfort that we have from technology and that kind of reliance and dependence we have, but then sort of contrast it with a discomfort. So like where we're confronted with that dependency, it sort of makes us take a step back and we feel this kind of discomfort. I really like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm really into old sci-fi, so anything that's like from the 70s, 60s, 70s. So the way you look at that kind of technology that's from the 70s, I feel like sci-fi that was written back then, it's sort of trapped in that kind of old aesthetic of technology, sort of branching out, trying to find something, an idea of what it's going to be like in the future. And there's an amazing book called The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. I'm not sure if you know that. But they have this amazing device called a mood organ. Mm-hmm. So this technology, they kind of it's almost like the way we have phones now. They'll kind of tap in what feeling they want to feel, and then they'll feel that. And there's this amazing quote, and it's my schedule for today lists a self accusatory depression. So they actually program in a depression from this technology. And I think your work kind of explores that emotional connection to technology. And I think that's really, I think it's really powerful. In your written work, we take technology like a pill. You say technology is the probiotic summoned to action when we conform to the antibiotics of the system. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your written work and how your written work goes alongside the performances and your inspirations for that.
Sure. So with that specific text, I was thinking a lot about this this idea that technology will become immune to us. And it's an idea that I formulated when I was in my residency in Tokyo, and I was reading a lot about like autoimmune technology and the fact that we won't be able to be aggressive with it. We won't be able to tease it any longer because it will have its own kind of immunity to us. And I like the idea that we would just have to accept it and consume it. And what was kind of interesting with that was that it links to the sort of blindfolding kind of state that we're in that I was talking earlier, that there already are kind of VR or AR kind of headsets and glasses that don't care if you have any eye or sight problems. It will bypass that and it will make you ever seeing. So this idea that you will never be able to be blind again is something that I find kind of quite harrowing, because if you want to kind of take your glasses off and have that sort of blurred relation with society, I find that comforting. And the fact that all of a sudden you couldn't, because you had this like headset that allows you to see even if you have any sight issues, found it really horrible to understand. So the best way for me to navigate that was to write about it, and this is how writing comes into my work. It's a very performative writing, and I often have a sort of identity or like a hidden identity in the text that I often address. So I ask questions, this idea that I'm like, they could be read as rhetorical questions, but actually I do ask someone, this sort of hidden identity behind the work. And I don't know who that is, but maybe it's something that, points me to these ideas or these technologies that interest me, the chameleon kind of in technology. And I think that's the relationship. And I write a lot about that, and I use repetition a lot in the work, so it becomes again like a feedback loop. And I like to kind of exhaust the subject. So in order to do that, I write through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of dystopian connection, isn't it? It's like, using technology as something that we can easily abuse, but sort of seeing it as anthropomorphic at the same time. Like the way like my son will talk to Alexa, like he'll really be so bossy. You would never talk to a human like that. And that kind of dystopian notion that technology will sort of get its own back on us, or it's kind of changing and evolving all the time, and humans haven't really evolved for thousands of years. So it's kind of, it's so interesting.
Yeah. And with that, you were talking about earlier, it's that somehow they had the possibility to dream, and that idea of promise of something in the 70s, but they didn't have the technology, or they didn't have the manufacturing bodies to produce that technology. But actually we have it now, and who knows what else we'll have. Like we have temples that no longer have a human priest, they have a robot priest, which has been sort of like at first kind of set up to just chant something and like repeat this chant, but now it's actually automized to preach and to also be confident. to someone. So I find that really fascinating, because it takes me back to that 70s sci-fi, that promise was there, and now we actually have the manufacturing bodies, and we can combine both, and that's a very dystopic reality, which it's very exciting. But,
yeah, exciting but scary.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any more questions, just put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll keep asking my questions. So, I really like the way, so in your film work and your photography, the camera kind of becomes a mechanism for creating an illusion. And sometimes in your film work, you look directly out at the audience, so you're kind of breaking that fourth wall.
Yeah.
And I really like the way it kind of, you're creating this illusion and this spell that we get wrapped up in, and then all of a sudden you'll break that fourth wall, and your gaze kind of allows us to be confronted with our own gaze. So we realize we're not the voyeur anymore, like you're looking out at us. And I think that's really powerful in breaking the fourth wall. And I just wonder if you could talk a bit more about, you know, the way you do that, the way you look out of the photographs, or if in your performance work you do that. So if you'll have an audience, then you'll actually look directly into people's eyes.
Yeah, so I do that quite a lot in live performances to establish that tension, and I like to kind of make it clear that it's not an equal relationship. You know, you're either sort of trespassing this space where I'm performing a very intimate kind of ritual that shouldn't be for you, but it kind of is because you sort of stumbled upon it. And I've worked a lot with the idea of thresholds, and I had a performance where the audience couldn't see me at all. They could see the mirror that I was reflected into. But at the end of it, I come down, and then they see me in real life, but also as the reflection. So that I like that sort of tension, and a bit like a horror factor, that, you know, someone kind of holds your gaze while you're not sure whether you're allowed to watch something, but you've been caught, so now you have to kind of to stay with something. And also, you know, this idea like that comes from like peeping holes, or just very kind of perverted spaces where the relationship is very hierarchical, and then the person outside of the space has quite a lot of power over you. But I also like to shift that, and, you know, to grab or like raise my hand, even if it's like through a video or a film work. I like to keep that relationship with someone's eyesight, almost like, you know, kind of telling them, you know, we'll be discreet. This is our relationship. It's only you and I that, you know, that are holding this space together. But I also like, disregarding the audience as well, as in, you know, you're there, but you're not the most important aspect. I like to kind of focus on the body of the technology that I'm working with, so that, it can shift, but it's a relationship that I definitely care about and try to kind of develop it.
I think, and I think very much with technology, like on Instagram or something, you'll be looking and you never it's always like a private experience. So to be able to sort of have someone hold a mirror up to you and make you aware that they can see you back, I think that's quite powerful, because then that kind of intimacy is invaded upon. And I think there's a lot of things with privacy and technology. So to have your kind of gaze reverted and you be the one that's looked at, I think that's really interesting.
To see, you know, being like something that we don't have anymore, or we're willing to relinquish that privacy. It's something that is kind of, it's just kind of an interesting idea to think about, that we're willing to participate in oversharing and putting kind of ourselves in this sort of panopticon kind of society where, you know, we kind of distribute these images freely, and the sort of performativity around it is really interesting in terms of surveillance, and that's also why I was fascinated by, like, during during the first lockdown, I was walking around kind of my neighborhood, my borough, and there was a lot of construction work that was happening at that time. And one of the surveillance companies that they were using was called chameleonic surveillance or something like that. And the fact that, you know, you're watched by these surveillance cameras, but they're supposed to be chameleonic. They're supposed to be the same texture as the building they are covering, and there's just such a weird relationship, you know, all of a sudden to be like, you can't evade it at all. You know, you're this you're very small in front of a cyclop that's essentially a surveillance camera.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting because if you think about it, it makes me think about this relationship with the sun. You know, how we don't watch it because, like, we don't look at it because our eyes are gonna burn and we're gonna go blind. And it kind of makes me think, you know, like, do you feel lonely up there, you know, not knowing that no one will ever watch you, no one ever will, because they're too afraid to lose their sight. And it kind of it makes me think that it's like a metaphor for a surveillance camera, that, you know, are you lonely there? Are you, like, what would you do if you were able to grow a body?
Yeah. Oh, Frank's back.
I'm back.
Hi, Frank.
Thank you. This is a very sorry to interrupt the conversation you're having there and the fascinating insight we're getting through there. I just want to also include Susanna's comment and Susanna's question, really, about design of technology in the 60s and 70s, which was very futuristic. And Susanna's basically asking that could you comment on the technology today is much more advanced, but the design is so very pedestrian these days. What are your thoughts on that, Catinca, maybe?
I think that's kind of what attracts me, you know, to those space helmet TVs that I had at the beginning of the talk. The fact that, you know, they belong to this era where, you know, space age design was kind of a new ideology, and it made it look like, you know, these are not functional objects only, they're beautiful to look at, and they're this sort of like like an artifact or a relic of some sort that you adorn your house with, and that, I'm really attracted to that, which is also why I can't figure out if I'm attracted to new technology or old technology. I think it has to have, with old technology, I think it needs to have some time, you know, to mature and age and be quite stuck in time, and that's when it attracts me. And with new technologies, I think I'm attracted to this sort of economy, like with the tarantula light that I'm working with. You know, it has 8 legs, it's held together by a core. It's kind of that definition of reduction. And reduction in design and all these kind of design ideologies that make everything essence only. And that's a very new technology. It's, I think, 2017, 2018, and it's 3D printed and it's still very beautiful. So I think there's a mix, I think.
Yeah, and also I suppose the other thing is that with new modern technology, it is very much customizable to people's individual tastes as well. You know, iPhones and things like that. We have our own covers for them now. We sort of customize them ourselves, and you know, it makes it a bit less mainstream, I suppose. But it loses the iconic status, I suppose, because really the iconic status is just the phone itself and the simple design.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well, thank you very much again for your presentation, and thank you to Laura for leading a Q&A as well. Thank you for attending today. Everyone who's participated, thank you very much. We are finishing, or the event will sort of finish automatically in about 47 seconds, I've been told. So I'd just like to wrap up again by thanking Catinca for presenting today. Wanted to also announce that our next session is then on the 12th of May, where Erin Solomons will also, who's also a performance artist and a recently graduated PhD student, we'll talk about her performance art to do with collodion photography as well. So I hope that we can welcome all of you again for that session. There's been lots of thank yous and thumbs up and applause for you in the chat. So just want to and and Laura also saying that she could talk to Catinca all day. So maybe for the next session we shall increase it a bit more. So thank you.